Last year, I made a video about Metro's super long-range plans, and compared it to my own ideas for a final build-out of the LA Metro system. This year, I want to do another video about long-term plans, but this time, it'll be a little different. First off, I'll start with the map that we recently ended up with at the end of the 2022 Metro Update video, with all the changes we learned about this year, albeit with a few minor design alterations. And second, I'm reining it in a little bit, and discussing what I think realistically the Metro system could look like after another round of building equivalent to Measure's R&M. A lot of this is based on my own ideas, but tempered by the realities of what I feel Metro is likely to do even in the distant future. How distant? Well, I think the most optimistic read possible on when the Measure M projects will all get built is 25 years, as I discussed in my last video, which puts us exactly 10 years ahead of the 2057 open dates for the final Measure M transit projects. This would be possible by securing a lot of funding from federal, state, or local sources like enhanced infrastructure financing districts that would accelerate every single project to some degree. We looked in the last video at how all that could be possible. So let's say that 2047 rolls around. What next? First of all, I'll be 60, which I don't love, but it means my generation will probably be in the driver's seat of politics, finally.
Nixon's back!
Not to be too morbid, but once most of the boomer generation is gone, we'll be left with a voting base that is extremely motivated to address climate change, and will be even more so because we'll be deep in the throes of it. I do think that this will cause a serious rearrangement of fiscal priorities, and will create a huge opportunity for funding carbon-free mass transit all over the country. I think the next round will wind up getting built more easily and quickly than this round, assuming the country hasn't dissolved into anarchy, or that the species hasn't managed to wipe itself out yet, which, you know, even odds. So here, I'll run through the projects in no particular order that I think will become priorities in this next round of construction. First, let's finally build the D line out to the sea. It's gonna happen at some point, so why not here? Next, let's convert some BRTs to light rail. The Lincoln BRT will certainly get upgraded to a C line extension, which was always the intention, and will probably extend to the D line as well. I've got it intersecting with the Sepulveda line Manchester station on this map, because I think the junction will be far easier to build here, but it could also perhaps travel further south, here, along this strip, that LAX plans to develop into commercial and residential property. The NoHo-Pasadena BRT will get converted to rail, but I think with some caveats. First, as I've mentioned before, I think it makes more sense to take it from NoHo to downtown Burbank directly along Chandler, because I'm also extending the Crenshaw line up along Olive into Burbank Airport at the North Station by the new terminal. I do think a connection between the Burbank studios and the rest of the valley is necessary though, so I'll get to that in a minute. And then we'll take the light rail conversion through Glendale, where I have it traveling on Brandon, Colorado instead of Central and Broadway, but either would be fine. Through Eagle Rock, but stopping at Memorial Park Station. I've abandoned my goofy idea of trying to have it take over the A-line here. And this BRT stub? Well, I think there actually should still be a BRT line, but operating in the middle as an express. Might as well use these freeways for something carbon-free if we're not going to tear them down. So, if we take it back to the freeway, but this time bypass Eagle Rock, like Eagle Rock's NIMBYs actually wanted, funnily enough, pull it off the freeway here for a connection to downtown Glendale, meaning that the light rail station of the converted line should be here or here, depending on whether it uses Brand or Central, instead of at Lexington like for the BRT, and then take it back to this station at Warner Brothers where it can connect with the Crenshaw line, and where it will become a local line again, hitting Toluca Lake before connecting with the B line at Universal City, and traveling up Ventura to Reseda, where it will go to Cal State Northridge. I think this has a nice local at the ends, express in the middle option to get between Pasadena, Glendale, and Burbank fast, with good connections to local service in each area. Also in Burbank, while we're up here, let's extend the B line up to hit both Metrolink stations. Now the south station won't serve quite as much of a function once the terminal moves up to the north one, and I don't think a new south terminal, like I suggested before, is likely any time in the foreseeable future due to the strict limits on Burbank Airport. But I doubt they'll remove the south station, so may as well connect them. Lastly in the valley, let's extend the East San Fernando Valley line south to give us another tunnel terminating at Santa Monica San Vicente. I do think this is more far-fetched than some of the other ideas, but I'm not going so far as to have it take over the La Cienega BRT, which I think is even less likely. Instead, I'm extending that BRT up the Sunset Strip to give it transit access to end at Hollywood and Highland, which I think would be a relatively simple project in the grand scheme of everything else here. I also think a BRT from Century City along Santa Monica is possible. I mean, I'm sure Beverly Hills will still suck in the future, and Santa Monica is a little narrow at parts, but it's such a major corridor, and I think BRT is the only way Santa Monica gets served, thanks to the hybrid alignment of the Crenshaw line cutting off any possibility for an underground Santa Monica light rail line, at least west of Santa Monica La Brea. So if we take this BRT line to East Hollywood, where to next? I think this one goes down Sunset to Union. But we already have a BRT along that route, you say. Well, BRTs can interline easily, but I think that instead, that original Sunset BRT transforms into a line that continues down Los Feliz Boulevard to connect with and be taken over by the Western BRT. I think the Vermont BRT south of Wilshire becomes its own light rail line all the way to San Pedro. Path of least resistance and all. And north of Wilshire, I think the remaining BRT stub takes a detour to Hyperion after Santa Monica, heads through Atwater Village to connect with the Glendale Metrolink station, which I'm calling Atwater Village, and turns east to go through Glendale, along York to South Pasadena, and then interline with the Huntington BRT to Arcadia. I think this gives us a nice trip across Northeast LA that would be heavily used. But why this gap between the two BRTs here? Well, because we're going to extend the West Santa Ana branch north. It's a trickier question of what to do with it, since it'll be coming from Union now and not 7th Metro, but I think it wants to serve Dodger Stadium, which puts it traveling just below Chinatown, so why not add a station there? And actually, there's another option for this connection to Chinatown and Dodger Stadium. Metro recently suggested that they could try to have the West Santa Ana branch share tracks Union Station with the A line to save money, which would look something like this and allow them to build an aerial or at-grade Little Tokyo station. Hilariously, probably almost on top of the old one they took down, instead of a more expensive underground one, and would keep them from needing to build a Union Station at all. I hadn't thought this was possible due to complications with interlining, but if it is possible, Metro could run the West Santa Ana branch trains through the existing Chinatown station and split it off on a new aerial track here, and bring it up this little road, have it rise over the freeway, and go into the hillside at a portal here, where the underground portion can easily be done cut and cover by excavating part of the parking lot, with a station here. Hell, you could even re-greenify a bunch of the parking lot and undo some of the devastation done to Elysian Park, since this would allow so many more people to take transit to the stadium. This is a way better use of space than a gondola, which isn't much of a transit solution due to its capacity and is more of a tourist attraction. If they could run this without impacting operations, then headways throughout the regional connector would remain the same, except at Union and Chinatown where they would increase. So, very curious to see what Metro determines about the feasibility of this. Anyways, continuing on, then we'll put it under Sunset for a little bit to Echo Park, bring it up Glendale underground with the Silver Lake station to Atwater and the AMTRAK station, and then with the BRT to Chevy Chase and Brand. What else can we do in this area? How about a BRT from Eagle Rock down to Glassell Park, Echo Park, and Alvarado? So now we wind up with an extremely well-served Hollywood, Glendale, Burbank, and Northeast LA with all of these changes. Let's do another BRT conversion. The Venice BRT should definitely become a rail line, which could be elevated for much of it thanks to the huge width of Venice. Here, it can switch to Pico or remain on Venice. Venice spaces it between other stops on north-south lines better, but Pico is probably busier, so I'm choosing Pico here. And instead of terminating at 7th Metro like the BRT, I have it continuing east to serve the Fashion District, since the West Santa Ana branch isn't now, turning north to the Flower District, adding yet another connection to both Little Tokyo and Union, and then having it take over the Valley Boulevard BRT to El Monte. That BRT past El Monte can be assumed by the Silver Line BRT, and the stations for El Monte can be consolidated. Oh, and by the way, I'm switching BRT from letters to numbers if you haven't noticed, because I think it's a lot cleaner. This is the 1 line now. Continuing south, we really need more east-west connections for all of South LA, so first we have a light rail line under Slauson, and then BRT on Manchester and BRT on Artesia. I have Manchester going to LAX and Artesia going to the beach. For Slauson, I wavered on whether to draw a connection here up to Atlantic, and then all the way up to the A-line and past that to the Rose Bowl. This would be an important north-south connection, but the complexities of it are maybe a bit much. For For instance, adding a third aerial or at-grade mode on this section of Atlantic that already has below-ground E-line light rail and an at-grade busway means that we'd probably have to just, like, close Atlantic to cars here, which does not bother me, but we'll see where the city is then. And up here, you would probably need to interline with the A-line, and I'm avoiding interlining as much as humanly possible. So all of this makes me doubt that it would be in the next batch of projects, so let's leave it off. Moving way south, let's bring the Crenshaw line into Long Beach finally, to CSU Long Beach. Now we have South LA quite well served as well. The San Gabriel Valley is looking a little thin for north-south connectivity, so I think we can pull the Artesia BRT up a little further actually and have it terminate at Azusa. We can also pull the E-line down for a short distance to meet it. Finally, I've got the two longest shots here. First of all, this wouldn't even be an LA County project, but I've got the West Santa Ana branch going to Santa Ana. Now, I know that last section of this right-of-way isn't available anymore because of their under-construction streetcar, but we can bury it there. And second, I've got an LAX Express Metrolink. And again, I know the harbor sub isn't available anymore thanks to Rail to River, but my thinking is if they build the Slauson line below it, they can single-bore tunnel it with enough room for light rail tracks above and express Metrolink tracks below all at once, while still using these rail right-of-ways either above or at grade, and tunneling the rest of the way to LAX here on its own. Expensive for sure, but tunneling under Metro-owned property is cheaper than tunneling under other property at least, and I think that an express connector between LAX and the high-speed rail hub will be pretty important at some point. In fact, now that I'm thinking about it, you could actually think of this as a high-speed rail extension, maybe, but I don't know if there's enough space at LAX for that. I don't know, that feels more complex. Okay, actually, I lied. There's one more thing we should do here. There will definitely be better Ontario Airport access than a dumb Musk tunnel at some point, especially as it'll have a high-speed rail station that should connect with the wider network. So let's futz with the map to make it more geographically accurate, and then extend the A-line to Upland, Ontario Airport, and East Ontario Metrolink, and the 1 line to Ontario AMTRAK and Ontario Airport. Let's add an AMTRAK stop at the airport station too, it already goes right by it. Pretty much all of this would have to be done by San Bernardino County. So of course there's more we could do here, but I think this represents the amount of building that would happen in the next round of projects. If we pull back and take a look at the standard half-mile radius of service areas for rapid transit stations, we can see with white for rail and blue for BRT, this would serve a huge portion of LA with rapid transit access, and would make it significantly easier for anyone to live here without a car, especially as first last-mile improvements and local bus improvements will only grow. And if we add a mile radius for Metrolink station, 2-mile radius for Amtrak stations, and 4-mile radius for California high-speed rail, we can see access to commuter and regional rail is not too shabby either. For fun, we can see our Metrolink network in isolation with the routes of California high-speed rail and Amtrak displayed, our Metro rail in isolation, and our busways in isolation. The 50 billion question is, of course, when. It's hard to see Measure M projects being all complete more than 10 years ahead of schedule. Metro would need to change a lot to speed things up, which may well happen in the next decade, and politics in the country in particular would need to shift massively to allow for huge sums of federal money to flow, which I'm a little more pessimistic on. Even as the boomers die off and climate change ravages the globe, minority rule is just so entrenched in the US thanks to the Senate and Electoral College, not to mention the current makeup of the Supreme Court, that I think it'll take the cities of a number of rural states growing a lot to change things. Basically having Kansas City and St. Louis and so on becoming Austin and Atlanta. That'll take time. But I do think 25 years feels like a realistic time frame for a sea change in our politics, assuming democracy doesn't get so eroded this decade that there's no way to get it back. And who knows. So what do some timelines actually look like? One that isn't crazy is that Metro finishes Measure M by 2047, as I predicted before, getting a funding package together for the next round then, and taking another 25 years to build it, meaning we'll get this in 2072 when I'll be 85. Woohoo. A rather more pessimistic timeline is that Metro doesn't even finish Measure M until like 2060, and another funding round never even gets approved, and bits and pieces of this wind up getting built over the next century. While LA declines in population anyway due to massive heat waves, wildfires, and critical water shortages. Hell, this actually may be the realistic timeline. The so optimistic it hurts timeline would say that Metro massively gets its shit together in the next 5 years and starts accelerating everything in Measure M to be done by 2040. It's actually not completely bonkers to think that's possible. And if positive national political change actually happens within that time frame, we could conceivably get a very belated, massive Green New Deal program nationwide to try to mitigate the worst effects of climate change and decarbonize the economy, which could see all of this getting built within a decade and a half, by like 2055, when I'll only be 68, so hey. Well, that was nice, considering the idealistic dream for a second. Let's see what we can manage before the country devolves into Gilead and half of California burns to a crisp. At the end of the last video, I asked what you would like to see next, and the consensus seemed to be videos about METROLINK, AMTRAK, and high-speed rail, which I'm going to roll all together into one video. I won't go quite as deep into high-speed rail as many other YouTube channels have done. As many pointed out, it's been talked about a lot. But I'll talk in depth about how it relates to Southern California. So until next time.